Hello and welcome to Detective Squirrel Investigates. This is the second part of the three-part series They Weren't Jack. The first part on Montague John Druitt. A link will be available in the description below. This part is on Seweryn Kosowski, who, when he moved to England, chose the English name of George Chapman. So that is a name that I will be using throughout the video, partly to avoid my awful pronunciation of his real name, and partly to avoid offending any potential Polish viewers. And talking about offence, the facts presented in this video are based on my own research and are not meant to offend anyone. Okay, so let's go. Polish-born George Chapman is believed to have arrived in London sometime around 1887. He worked at one point at the White Hart public house in Whitechapel, where he also ran a barbershop business out of the basement. This was before he took over the Crown public house in Southwark, south of the river, where he lived in the apartment above. So what led Chapman to be suspected of being Jack the Ripper? There seems to be two specific factors that had come to light during Inspector Aberline's investigation. First was the attendant physician Dr. Llewellyn's view that based on the mutilations the killer had performed on the bodies, he must have had some anatomical knowledge and may have been even a surgeon. Chapman had studied to be a surgeon and was assistant to the chief surgeon at the Praga Hospital in Warsaw before moving to England. The second factor is based in the society of the time. During the mid-19th century, there was a mass Jewish immigration due to Jewish families escaping oppression by the Soviet Russians. Many of those families moved from Russia itself as well as other countries occupied by the Soviet Russians, including Czechoslovakia, Romania, and of course Poland. Many of these families moved into the already poor and overcrowded Whitechapel district of London. This led to a certain level of anti-Semitism. Some historians and ripperologists have suggested that a pompous Englishman, or perhaps even the Assistant Commissioner Sir Robert Anderson himself, may have stated that the killer wasn't an Englishman. And due to the recent immigration of Jewish families into the district, some suggested that the killer could be a Jew. This was further compounded by the Star newspaper, no relation to the present-day Daily Star newspaper. The Star even ran a headline stating that the killer was a Jew. So because of this, as Chapman was a Jew, that also made him a suspect. These two factors led Inspector Aberline to investigate Chapman. Aberline spoke to Chapman's first wife, Lucy Badowski. According to Lucy, George was prone to violent outbursts and had at least one mistress, as well as often travelling to Whitechapel to engage prostitutes. Lucy seemed to have got lucky in her timing in leaving Chapman, as he would move his mistress, Mary Isabel Spink, in. She would pose as his wife until he murdered her on Christmas Day 1897. He already had another mistress by that time, Bessie Taylor, who would also move in and pose as his wife, until once again he had murdered her on Valentine's 14th of February 1901. Finally, his final mistress, posing as his wife, Maud Marsh, he had killed by the 22nd of October 1902. Only 3 days later, he was arrested by Inspector George Godley, who had been sergeant to Inspector Abberline. Godley claimed that on congratulating him on the arrest, Abberline had stated, "You caught Jack the Ripper." So according to Abberline, Chapman lived in the area at the time of the murders. His later convictions of the murders of his 3 wives proved that he was more than capable of murder, and that shortly after the murders, Chapman moved to America, and he had trained as a surgeon. So compelling stuff. So what is the evidence that shows that Chapman wasn't Jack? Well, first there is Abberline's assumption that he lived and worked in the Whitechapel area at the White Hart pub during the murders. In fact, he did not start at the White Hart until 1890, some 2 years after the murders. Also the fact that Chapman used poison, which doesn't match up with the psychological profile of Jack the Ripper. A killer who gets his thrills by eviscerating his victims seems unlikely to get the same kind of thrill by using poison. It is true that Chapman did move to America shortly after the murders, but he was only there for a few months before returning and then taking over the Crown pub in south of the river, Southwark. So that's the evidence that proves that George Chapman was in fact not Jack. So, well, thank you for joining me in another Detective Squirrel Investigates video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell to keep you up to date on future videos. Also comment below with any true crime cases you would like me to cover in a further video. In the meantime, this is Detective Squirrel out.